All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. This is DFS Army's tournament strategy show. We're going to look at last night's slate. We're going to look at today's slate, pregame it a little bit, make sure we're all thinking about things the right way. Then we'll get to the pre-lock show later today. More details to come later in the show on that. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. Starting off with last night's slate. This was the $100,000 nuts lineup last night. Last night was good for me. Core plays pretty much all worked out. Oddly enough, the one that was disappointing was SGA, but still positive night. A lot of those guys are here. Some of these guys were not. This $100,000 winning lineup had some really nice sneaky plays. Some of these guys I was not on. One being Terry Rozier. I didn't love that Miami-Orlando game, but Miami really came through. Even Jimmy Butler had a decent game last night as well. So Terry Rozier, solid side. Amin Thompson was a core play for pretty much everybody. Not surprised to see him here. Dylan Brooks wasn't someone that I prioritized, but the domination station, DFS Army's optimizer, gave us above the field ownership on Dylan Brooks. I think around 11%, if I'm remembering correctly there. Karl Anthony Towns, I did not force exposure to. We talked about it. I was totally fine if you wanted to take one or two shots on any of the Timberwolves, but ultimately I didn't force any exposure there. I might have had 1-2% of him, but not enough to matter. Isaiah Hartenstein was a core play for me yesterday. That went well. Anthony Edwards, another situation of a guy I didn't force exposure to, so I might have had 1% if the domination station gave me that, but was under the field on him, which was unfortunate. Dante DiVincenzo, we had 99% of last night. That helped us a lot. Had some really good leverage there, but he was a core play. Andre Drummond, I had some things I had to handle last night, so I wasn't able to swap off to him once he moved into the starting lineup, but at 5K, he made total sense. So all in all, good night. Glad that happened. Glad last night went the way it did. Wish I could have forced a little bit more exposure to Andre Drummond, but it happens that way sometimes. Thomas, what's up, man? Hope you're doing well. I know last night was pretty good for you too, so hopefully you can keep it going, like you said earlier. Starting off, we have the Cavs going up against the Wizards. Let me start off by just saying this is a interesting slate. We're waiting on some pretty important injury news, but my main priorities, per usual, are going to be these high total games. There aren't really any extremely low total games on this slate, but I do want to prioritize that Piston Kings game, the Hawks Celtics game, and a mixture of the Warriors, Sixers, Cavs, Wizards are all in pretty good spots as well. And then we really can't even ignore the Raptors, Hornets, Spurs, Heat, but I don't want to build around those games as much. There's just a few people I like there. So we'll get into that. Anthony, what's up, man? Is Barnes a lock of the night? I'm saying at least 48 against Charlotte. All right, man. I hear you. I hear you. We'll get there. JM said, what's up, team? Let's get this dub. Smith killed me yesterday, but at least cash in my single entry. Nice. Glad you at least cashed in that single entry. That can save you on certain nights. Appreciate that, Mega Royal. Yeah, the Knicks came through for us. I definitely didn't feel great about it, but they're still core plays, so it is what it is. Starting off for the Cavs, I didn't plan on being super interested in them tonight because they're healthy, but they're given this amazing gift of having a soft matchup against the Wizards. And so that makes a $9,900 Donovan Mitchell buyable on this slate. It makes me nervous. I'm interested in seeing where ownership falls for him. But I want to try my best to at least match the field on Mitchell tonight. But it's going to be a little tougher. Jared Allen, I don't love. I typically am always higher on Evan Mobley than I am Jared Allen. Evan Mobley is still seeing limited minutes. We haven't really seen him see more than 30 plus minutes, but he's been fantastic even with that limited amount of run. Ultimately, I think Jared Allen is a viable play, but and Jared Allen is showing up a little bit in some of my initial runs, so I'm fine with that, but I'm prioritizing Evan Mobley here, just because soft matchup against the Wizards, cheaper, and will be lower owned than Allen. So he's definitely someone I'm looking at as a potential leverage play tonight. Outside of that, Garland, LeVert, Strus, bit more streaky, bit less consistent, fine with one-offs, but not guys I'm looking to prioritize here. Spread is pretty wide here, so that makes me a little bit more nervous about some of the Cavs, but ultimately, I'm still taking some shots here. Anthony Hunt, good question. So, Sabonis or Donovan Mitchell, both viable plays, both guys I plan on having exposure to tonight, but I'm choosing Sabonis there. Nice, Mr. 5. Glad you're able to make it. Late Q on DeJounte. He'll love LA. Yeah, when I saw that Q tag on him, I was like, he's probably getting traded. I didn't see I might have missed some of that news. I'll double check it and refresh just in case. What's up, Zolo? Hope you're doing all right. You're late, but not by much. Not by much. We just looked at the earlier last night's slate and the first, and we looked at the Cavs a little bit. All right. Next up, we have the Wizards going up against the Cavs. For the Wizards tonight, they're pretty healthy. I mean, Marvin Bagley's out. Isaiah Livers is out, but I don't really care about that too much. Personally, I don't like picking on the Cavs. Guys like Tyus Jones, they're viable. I would assume in some of my early runs he's showing up, but he's not someone I'm forcing in. Daniel Gafford, I'm not playing, even though he's projecting pretty well. That could be a bias thing, but I'm not doing that against the Cavs when they're healthy. They're a good defense. Next up, we have the Raptors going against the Hornets. Another interesting team. We know the Hornets aren't great defensively typically. This is the lowest total game on the slate. My biggest concern with the Raptors is I like the matchup. I like a lot of their price tags. There's just other players I like a bit more than them. Scotty Barnes is fine. I know, Anthony, you already mentioned him. Ultimately, there's other pay-up options I like a bit more. Emmanuel Quickley at 7K. We know the upside he brings to the table. I do prefer Quickley over Scotty Barnes here in this spot. I expect to be around field weight exposure on Quickley. Ideally, I won't have to force that, though. RJ Barrett is totally fine as well, but I prefer CJ McCollum over RJ Barrett, and it's not even close for me, especially with Zion being questionable. So ultimately, again, viable plays here, but just not guys I'm looking to make a focal point for me on this slate. Jakob Poeltl is someone who I expect to be relatively low owned tonight, but we'll have to wait and see where ownership falls. I do plan on forcing him in if need be. Mitchell Mobley combo, I wouldn't force, but I'm okay with it if that's just where you land or your optimizer kind of puts that combination together by itself. As of right now, JM, I don't think 4 Kings are too many, but ideally I'll be closer to 2 or 3. Is it a bad strategy? I personally don't do it too often. I think it's a strat that a lot of people do, so I don't feel like that's really getting too different, but it can work, just like any strategy can work every now and again. Yeah, Thomas, we don't have too much value, but I think we might see some open up. Also, a lot of guys aren't that pricey either, so I don't feel like we're that desperate for value tonight. Yep, you already know it, K-Towns. Yeah, I like Jakob Poeltl tonight. Mr. 5 said, does a trade deadline worry you? I don't want the Barnes effect. Yeah, mid-game trade. It happens. It happens. I mean, for me, I've been playing DFS long enough where I just don't get too emotionally involved on just one particular slate. I just try to stick with what I do pretty consistently, and it works out for me more often than it does. Of course, like the trade deadline is a concern. It can burn us. It's burned us before in the past, but it's not going to change what I do. Yeah. Metro Boomin. Celtics are looking solid. Next up, we have the Hornets, a team I don't like as much as I originally thought I would. You all know that I like to pick on the Raptors. Ultimately, for me, I have some concerns with the Hornets tonight, mostly because Gordon Hayward is questionable. Cody Martin's questionable. Frank is questionable. But Gordon Hayward potentially returning. He's been out for a while. He probably still won't see that much run, but it lowers my interest in wanting to take a shot on the guys like Miles. It lowers my interest in wanting to take a shot on a guy like Miles Bridges, lowers my interest in PJ Washington. It lowers my interest in Brandon Miller a little bit, but he's been so good and they can use him in so many different ways. Might be fanboying a little bit here, but at 7,200, I'm still willing to take the shot on Brandon Miller against a soft Raptors team. So my thought process is this is no longer a team I want to prioritize, but I'm okay taking 1 or 2 shots, and those shots are going to be on Brandon Miller. And Nick Richards is projecting well enough where he's showing up already in my early lines. So I shouldn't have to force him in. But if at some point when we get to the pre-lock show, if I have to force him in, I'll do that then. Speaking of, for those of you that don't know, pre-lock show is at 5:30 p.m. Eastern today. That's when we talk about the execution side of things. I'll show the exact mins I have on players. We'll talk through the core plays. We'll talk through all of those details just in a bit more context. It's just what we're actually doing instead of more theory, which is what this show is. So yeah, I like the Hornets, but I'm prioritizing Miller and Richards. You can take the shots on the other guys, and I might land there, but ultimately they're not standing out for me too much right now. All right, next up we have the Hawks going up against the Celtics. Give me 1 second, guys. Need to answer this question I just got. Yeah, I had a friend lose a loved one, and so people are asking me a lot of questions so they don't have to bother him. So I had to answer that right quick. Let's see. I wouldn't say Miller's a lock. Miller's just someone I'm looking to prioritize. I don't lock too many players. On occasion, like last night, we had 1 or 2 guys I had 99% of, which is basically locking, but it's not my typical strategy. Next up, for the Hawks, going up against the Celtics, another interesting spot for these guys. DeAndre Hunter is going to play, which typically by itself would mean I'm not super interested in a lot of these Hawks, but DeJounte Murray is questionable. And so if he's out, obviously, maybe not super obviously to some people, the guy who sees the highest increase in usage is Trae Young. He's someone that I wasn't super interested in earlier, but if Murray's out, I'm playing Trae Young. Good game environment. Highest game total on the slate. I feel like that might have changed. No. But yeah, highest game total on the slate. I want exposure to this team. Also, if DeJounte Murray is out, Saddiq Bey also sees a nice increase in usage. Makes him way more viable as well. Also, I don't want to forget about Okongwu. I know he didn't break the slate or do anything super special last time out, but he still has that decent upside. And so he's someone that I think could fall through the cracks from an ownership standpoint, and I don't want to be one of those people who overlook him. Jalen Johnson, I'm always less excited about when Hunter's playing, but if he shows up a little bit, I'm fine with it. Same story with Bogdanovic. He's someone that, from a number standpoint, doesn't see like a direct increase in usage, but he will be more involved without DeJounte Murray, and so he's one of those guys I would like to see show up a little bit as well if Murray actually gets ruled out. No worries, man. No worries. All right, next up, for the Celtics going up against the Hawks, you guys know I like to pick on the Hawks. And they're once again in another high total game. The guy that I like the most, and I would expect everyone to like the most here, is Jason Tatum. The Hawks have really struggled against forwards this season. And so they're ranked 3rd in the league in giving up the most fantasy points to versatile forwards. And so Tatum's one of those guys I want to have tonight. Outside of that, the matchup's pretty neutral for guys like Drew Holiday and Derek White. Ultimately, Derek White has been the guy I like to lean towards a bit more when I'm looking at a guard to choose from this team. Drew just has some strong performances, but has been a lot more volatile. Whereas Derek White has at least had some 40-point performances a little bit more consistently. And earlier this season, we saw some 50-point performances. So as of right now, I'm taking my shot on Derek White here as well. And if Jaylen Brown and Porzingis show up, that's fine, but I'm not forcing them in like I will Tatum and White if they don't show up the way I want them to. All right, next up, we have the Warriors going up against the 76ers. You guys know I fucking hate seeing the Warriors on any slate. And there's a lot of reasons for that we don't need to go through right now. But ultimately, this team is looking pretty healthy, which is automatically something I don't like. And we saw last game, our guy Klay Thompson didn't finish the game. And so he stayed on the bench, which was something that got a lot of news attention. Kind of had a saddish interview. I think a lot of us can relate to being good at something and then no longer being the best at it, but definitely not on the same scale as Klay. He's projecting extremely well. It's looking like he's going to be super chalky on this slate. Sim model does like Klay Thompson at 5,500. We know Klay can be a bit of an emotional player. So it wouldn't shock me if he does have a stronger performance today. But this season, his shot has just not been falling. And so he just hasn't been in great form. If he starts off hot, I do expect Kerr to give him his usual run. So I'm still on the fence what I want to do with Klay. Draymond Green is projecting well. I'm not going to force him in any, but the matchup is solid without Embiid. And then Kuminga's been great this season. 7,200. That price tag makes him no longer I must have him, but kind of like some of the other guys here, if he shows up, that's fine. Curry is obviously always in play, but not a guy I'm looking to prioritize tonight. Zolo, you like Porzingis? I like that game. You guys know I love high total games, so Brown, Porzingis, ideally I'll get some of that exposure naturally. We'll see where ownership falls, though. I'm super curious. If Trent is out, do you like Grady Dick? I never like Grady Dick, Mega Royal, but he's definitely more viable if he is. I'll have a more firm opinion on that by the time we get to the pre-lock show, though. Mr. Five said Derek White, Tatum, Brown, Porzingis. Yep, agreed. Thoughts on Quinlan's? He's getting run right now. I'll have to look a little bit closer at him, to be honest. I don't have any strong opinions right now. Yeah, K-Towns. Tobias Harris is the number one option if Maxey sits. He's also just a very viable option today in general. What's up, fam? Hope you're doing well. Rodney, you like Lester tonight? All right, Kenny, I see you. Wiggins said, Wiggins screaming at me for some reason. Oh no, Mr. Five. When you have Andrew Wiggins, he's someone that could potentially get traded. So I know you were nervous about it a little bit. I am not trying to force Andrew Wiggins in, but he's another streaky guy who has strong performances. He had a pretty strong game a couple nights ago too, so not impossible, but I'm not doing it. For the Sixers, a lot of you have already mentioned it, but we have Tyrese Maxey listed as questionable. Joel Embiid's going to be out for a while. If Maxey's ruled out, the guy who sees the highest increase in usage here is actually Marcus Morris Sr. Let me refresh. I thought someone might have said, but Marcus Morris is also questionable. Also, Daniel House is questionable. So there's quite a few questionable tags here. I did like Marcus Morris before we got that news. I'm a bit more nervous about it with him questionable, but obviously if he's out, if Daniel House Jr. is out, they're not going to have a lot of forward options. They're going to run Kelly O into the ground. Matchup is pretty neutral here for Kelly O, and so he's someone I am just going to prioritize probably as long as Maxey's out for sure. And then if some of the other forwards are out, that just makes him an even better play. And then Tobias Harris, same exact thing here. He sees a nice increase in usage with Maxey out. Well, actually, he doesn't see like a crazy increase in usage, but he is obviously more involved and he does a lot more for this team. At 7,700, we've been on the Harris train for a while. He's going to be a focal point for me. You're right. This is a Kelly O revenge game too against the Warriors. So definitely people I want to be I want to play the Sixers tonight. We just have to wait on the injury news to see how much I want of them. Obviously, if Maxey gets ruled out too, that makes Patrick Beverley worth talking about. He has shown he does have like 30, 40 point upside when he sees a lot of minutes. I'll feel better about that if Daniel House Jr. and Maxey were out, but we'll just have to wait and see there. And then Jaden Springer's already decently viable. If Maxey's out, he's probably going to be one of those value options we're looking at and we have to consider. So a lot of possibilities here. I think the Sixers will what they do from an injury news standpoint will really shape this slate. Exactly, Mr. Five. You're spot on. They have the best value of the slate, blowout or not. We talked about Beverly and Springer, but I think you're right to talk about Korkmaz and right to talk about Mo Bamba too. Definitely a lot of viable pieces here. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting, but more of a wait and see approach for now. We'll talk about it later on the pre-lock show. For the Spurs tonight, going up against the Heat, we have an interesting spot. I also don't love the Spurs when I see them on the slate just because they have a lot of different combinations that they utilize, but we've started to see more of a trend over the last few weeks. Victor Wembanyama, not worried about this matchup against Bam at all. They use Victor in a lot of different ways, so even though the Heat have been pretty good against centers this season, Victor, in like one of his first 10 games this season, faced this team and had a 45 fantasy point performance. He's much better now. I expect him to have a very strong performance tonight. Once again, at 8,800. I love it when he's below 9K. And as of right now, I don't expect this to be the case later, but as of right now, he's showing up around a core play for me. Trey Jones is projecting well, so he's showing up a good bit. And then Jeremy Sohan is not showing up as much, but the sim model likes him, and the matchup is pretty solid. The Heat have struggled against forwards this season. So he's someone that, as long as he's low owned, I'm looking at as a potential leverage play. If he's chalky, I do plan on at least matching the field on him there. The other Spurs, when it comes to like Keldon Johnson, Collins, Champagny, they're fine, but I'm not going to force it. Heat are interesting. Heat are healthy. Let me double check that. Yeah, Heat are healthy. Jimmy had a good game last night. Terry Rozier had a decent game last night. The matchup against the Spurs, they've actually improved from a defensive perspective. And so they used to be a team that I like to attack with bigs, but they're actually ranked 20th in the most fantasy points allowed to versatile bigs. And so they're not the soft punching bag they were earlier this season. Bam is only 8K though. And Bam had a strong game earlier this season against the Spurs. That doesn't mean that will happen again, but he's still someone I'm looking at as a little bit of a sneaky play that I don't expect a lot of people to be on. So I do like Bam. I will be at least around field weight exposure on him. Tyler Hero, 6,500. I don't think the sim model liked him. I'll double check. Yeah, sim model didn't love him, but I do like the matchup here. The Spurs are giving up the second most fantasy points allowed to guards right now. That's a bonus point for Terry Rozier, and that's also a bonus point for Tyler Hero, who's only 6,500. Tyler hasn't had a ton of flashy games here recently. We've been missing that 40-point upside really since earlier in January, but it's still there, and in a soft matchup, that's when I'm more willing to take the shot on Hero. Terry Rozier is projecting well enough where he's showing up in my lines around 20-25% exposure currently. If that stays that way, that's fine. If he doesn't show up, by the time we get to the pre-lock show, I'll have to make a hard decision on if I have to force him in or not. Caleb Martin's projecting pretty well right now. Not overly excited about that, especially if we get the Sixers value, but if we don't, then he's looking like a viable option too. Let's see. What's up, Bronco? Hope you're doing all right, man. Caleb Martin's looking like, yeah, I agree, Zello. I agree. Josh Richardson, you have him in your line so far. I mean, Josh Richardson isn't standing out for me too much, so I wasn't getting to him. I'll look a little bit closer at him, though. Sim model's okay with him, not standing out too much there. 4,100. You could definitely do worse, but I'm not trying to force him in. He's been in surprisingly decent form over the last few games, but it feels like he's due for some regression. But we'll see. If you land there and you like the rest of the line, I'm not against it. Kenny said, in the sim model, what's the average projection referring to? Is that the season average or last few games average or something else? To be honest with you, Kenny, I have absolutely no idea. The only thing I look at in the sim model, I'll pull it up. is this 8x column. I look at and nothing else. Absolutely nothing else there. All right, moving on. We have the Pistons going up against the Kings. This is the second highest game total on the slate, but they're a little hard to talk about right now, mostly because Cade Cunningham is questionable for injury management. If Cade plays, I'm playing him tonight. At 7,900, I am playing Cade Cunningham. But if he doesn't play, then we have to consider other options. And Cade Cunningham was out for a while, but he's still seeing 30 plus minutes. His upside, he's been super consistent, scoring around like 38, 39 fantasy points. So upside hasn't been crazy high here recently, but in a nice, fast-paced game environment against the Kings, this is one of those spots I expect us to see that upside we were seeing earlier this season from him. So definitely, I like Cade Cunningham. He's showing up a good bit for me naturally already, but I'll put a like on him just to make sure I don't forget about him. If he doesn't play, I think we will have to take shots on some of these Piston guys, unfortunately. Probably like Ivy, maybe Bogdanovich, maybe Duran, Asar, Burks. I mean, I have to look a little bit closer at it to really have a good grip on it, but hopefully Cade just plays. I hope he does. For the Kings, I like this team a lot. The biggest concern with the Kings is this wide spread, this 13-point spread, largest spread on the slate, but it's a great matchup, and that's what I care about more than anything else. Rodney said, which matchup looks the best, Boston or Sacramento? The matchup is definitely better for Sacramento, but best game environment just in total is Boston. And that's because of the potential blowout concern. Agreed, Zolo. Cade is just too cheap. Smart idea to hedge for these late games. What do you mean? I mean, I think these late games should see decent ownership. But if you think most of the ownership will be in the early games, then yeah, it's totally fine. But I don't know ownership yet, but we'll see. Next up, we have, like I said, the Kings. I like a lot. Great matchup going up against the Pistons. Sabonis at 10,100. We've been playing bigs against the Pistons all season long, and we're going to keep doing it. It just keeps making sense. Even when there's blowout concern, the bigs have been crushing it. So Sabonis is someone that I plan on at least being around field weight exposure on. Would love it if he's criminally under-owned, but I don't think he will be. De'Aaron Fox is another guy at 8,100. He's a little bit more risky because his performance hasn't been the best this season, but in a good matchup against the Pistons, and hopefully in a fast-paced environment, especially if Cade plays, I love the back and forth that could happen here in this matchup. So De'Aaron Fox is another guy I want to at least match field exposure on. If he's under-owned, in my opinion, leverage play. Keegan Murray is someone I don't typically force exposure to. His performance is kind of all over the place, but at 5,700, he just feels a bit too cheap for the upside he brings to the table. So he's another guy I plan on having a decent amount of exposure to. Monk and Herter are both showing up a lot by themselves. 5,400, 5K, good matchup against the Pistons. I like these guys tonight, but I shouldn't have to force them in. But I would force Herter in if I have to. His minutes are just a little bit more secure most of the time. Appreciate that, Mr. 5. Hope you saw that. Kenny? For the Pelicans, going up against the Clippers, we have more injury news, which is nice-ish, but would love it if I had it already. For the Pelicans, we have Zion Williamson listed as questionable. Najee Marshall is questionable. The obvious strategy here, if Zion is out, is to play Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum and Joe Val. That's my plan. If that happens, that's what I'm going to do. If Zion ends up playing, the situation gets a little bit more messy for me. I'm really just going to prioritize CJ. And that's just because I like his price tag. I think he's a little bit too cheap. The Clippers have been a good defense. Ingram did struggle earlier this season against the Clippers. That's something to take into consideration. But ultimately, I like the price tag on these guys. So ideally, Zion sits. I can play Brandon Ingram. I can play CJ. That should solidify Joe Val's minutes a little bit more. So I'll take a shot on him. When it comes to Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, I'm looking a little... Obviously, if Zion's out, they get a boost. But if Zion and Najee Marshall both get ruled out, then they are both much more viable plays at their price tag. So if it's just Zion that sits, I'm just like, okay, I'll get a little bit of Trey Murphy, a little bit of Herb Jones, maybe even a little bit of Larry Nance. But if Najee's out and Zion, these guys become guys I want to see in my lines, and I'll force in if they don't show up enough. Yeah, Sim Model does like Brandon Ingram. And CJ too, I think. But the excitement level will depend on Zion. But I'll probably play them either way. We'll see. Just because of their price tag. And then we have the Clippers. These guys aren't cheap anymore, and I think they're finally priced appropriately. We have a nice game total here at 231, decent spread, hammer game. As of right now, I'm not leaning to forcing in any of these players, and it makes me nervous. Obviously, James Harden is in a good spot, but he's super expensive at 9K, and there's just other guys I would prefer. Kawhi Leonard at 8,900. If I'm taking a shot on one of these guys, it's probably going to be Kawhi, but still, I like other plays a bit more. And then PG has just not been great, and so that 7,700 price tag is super appropriate, and it's exactly where it should be. So ultimately, I want to find a spot to attack here, but none of them are standing out for me right now. So that's the slate in a nutshell, guys. I think it's an interesting one. I think as news breaks, some things will get some things will become a little bit more clear, and definitely once we get ownership updates too, we could definitely hopefully find some nice low-owned leverage plays too, which is the thing I care the most about when it comes to DFS. So appreciate you all. Look forward to seeing hopefully a lot of you on the pre-lock show. If not, I'll see you tomorrow for this show. Have a good one, y'all. Peace out. Good luck.